No lies, no distortions, just the facts and the truth about issues that matter. Facts First with Christian Esqueda.
Good evening, Friday po ngayon, final episode natin for this week at marami po tayong pag-uusapan uli. Una na po dyan, yung inauguration ng 17th President ng Pilipinas, yan po si President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. Ayan, sa mga loyalista niya at mga supporters, baka magalit na naman kayo. O magalit pa kayo, kompleto yan President Ferdinand Bongbong Romualdez Marcos Jr. Kung gusto nyo, mahal na Pangulong Bongbong Marcos. Okay? Yung pinapaliwanag ko sa inyo dati kasi yung paggamit ng term na President, President-elect, hintayin nyo pag na-inaugurate na tsaka pag nakapag-oath-taking na. So nakapag-oath-taking na po siya. So siya na po ang 17th President ng Pilipinas. So pag-uusapan natin, hihimayin natin yung kanyang mga sinabi kahapon sa kanyang inaugural speech, sa kanyang inauguration. Tatlo po yung topics natin ngayon. Medyo mahaba-haba yung programa natin ngayon. Sana mag-stay po kayo hanggang dun sa third topic natin. First topic natin, inauguration. Pangalawa, meron tayong guest from the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative, si Mr. Gregory Poling. Tapos ang third guest natin, pag-uusapan natin yung Angat Buhay NGO or Angat Buhay Program ni former Vice President Len Robredo na inilunsad ngayong araw na ito. For our first discussion, gusto pong i-welcome uli sa ating programa ang nagbabalik si Professor Jean Franco. Siya po isang professor ng political science sa University of the Philippines sa Diliman. Magandang gabi po, Professor Jean. Nice to have you again on Facts First.
Oo nga, thank you Christian for having me again. Magandang gabi sa mga nanonood at nakikinig.
Okay. Alam ko marami na nag-uusap-usap or nag-discuss nitong yung mga sinabi ni President Bongbong Marcos kahapon, no. Pero kung gusto kong pag-usapan yung yung simulan natin yung discussion doon sa tone that you think he was able to set with that particular speech. Taliwas ba ito doon sa inaasahan nyo or it was basically what you had expected?
It was of course what I had expected to sort of herald the fact that he won by majority vote, thanking his supporters. But then I just thought that it would have been better if he delivered it in Filipino. Kasi, iniisip ko lang for someone who won with more than 31 million votes at and you know naman yung bulk ng kanyang voters would be DNE. Para sa akin, it would have been best if it were delivered in Filipino. But then, ang naiisip ko lang, baka naman he is really more comfortable in delivering long speeches in English rather than in Filipino. But then, pwede mo ring isipin that the speech was really geared towards the international community to convince them that this is what I'm going to do.
Bakit kaya? Kung ganun man, may ganun pagtingin talaga, no? Baka ang audience na rito, international community, anong klaseng convincing ba sa tingin niyo yung kailangan niyang gawin?
Well, naisip ko baka talagang nakita naman nila yung international press, no, and how they reacted to his victory. Marami rin pa rin kasi, no, yung foreign media nagtataka pa din why he won. So, yun yung ano doon, no? So, kailangan niyang i-kumbinsihin sila. So, he had to do it in English and he had to convince them. So, yun yung basa ko doon.
So mukhang hindi pa nakaka-move on yung iba dun sa acceptance phase, no? Na after 36 years mula nung patalsikin sa Malacanang yung pamilya Marcos, nakabalik na sila muli sa Malacanang at ang pangulo na po yung anak ng dating diktador, si Ferdinand Marcos Sr. At 50 years po, almost 50 years after his father declared martial law, no? Yan po yung mga konteksto na wag niyo sanang kakalimutan sa mga nanonood, no? So, mukhang ano yan, mukhang kailangan parang ipaliwanag ba yan, yung ganyang aspeto?
Yes, of course. Especially sa international media, they could not believe it. Parang anong meron? Bakit siya bumalik? Bakit siya nanalo overwhelmingly, di ba? Yun yung patuloy nilang tinatanong. Because probably in their own settings, that would never have happened.
Mm-mm. Oo nga, kasi tinitingnan ko rin yung mga reports coming from the international press. Talagang
Mm.
hindi nawawala yung konteksto doon eh, no?
Yeah,
Ah, actually malulupit yung
malupit.
and actually
Mm.
factual naman yung kanilang description doon sa nakaraang administration. Pero dito, do you think anong tingin niyo rin sa naging tone ng kanyang speech? Kasi a big part of that was spent talking about unity. Parang hindi niya sinabi exactly, 'di ba? Pero parang bigyan niyo siya ng
Yeah,
pagkakataon.
oo. Yun naman talaga and of course I expected it kasi para may continuity. It would be weird kung, medyo hindi gano'n yung pinaka-tone nung speech. It's just that it was short compared to previous, anong tawag dito, inaugural speeches, at siyempre compared kay, former President Duterte. So and, ang ano ko lang kasi usually 'pag inaugural speeches, I don't know, you need to have something bombastic. Either meron kang i-announce na the next day would, be, either be a surprise or something that would set the tone of the next 6 years. Yun yung parang medyo wala or today sana merong EO, 'di ba?
Oo
So
nga,
yun
usually
yung
may ganyan
parang
eh.
medyo
EO
ine-expect.
number one. Oo nga, wala pa,
Oo,
no?
oo. Mm.
Although someone told me kung ano yung magiging laman ng EO number one eh. Pero hindi ko na babanggitin, baka hindi matuloy eh.
Oo. Mm,
It
mm.
had something to do, I was told, a few weeks ago, reorganization ng isang government department. Okay. So, ito
Oo.
yung wala, no? Tsaka medyo tahimik yata ngayon, no?
Oo, tahimik, oo.
Oo. Pero dito, kasi may tinitingnan akong part ng speech niya eh. Ang nakita ko rin sa mga coverage ng iba, tumutok to sa sinabi niya regarding unity. Iba naman, nag-focus doon sa trust no one. 'Di ba? Wag daw magtiwala.
Oo. Mm.
Oo. Pero ako nakita ko, I don't know if you would agree with me. Meron siya sinabi toward the end, yung sabi niya, you will not be disappointed, so do not be afraid. And if you
Mm.
ask why I am so confident of the future, I will answer you simply that I have 110 million reasons to start with, such as my faith in the Filipino. Ang inisip ko rito, although this was not unexpected, no? Kahit
Mm.
31 million yung bumoto sa kanya, he had to make it clear that he would govern for the whole Philippines, for all
Mm.
Filipinos. Pero telling itong part na to, no, you will not be disappointed. So do not be afraid. Ano ba to? Dahil takot yung mga hindi bumoto sa kanya? Or baka yung mismong bumoto sa kanya may agam-agam dahil siguro sa kawalan ng detalye ng kanyang mga programa during the campaign? Ano po
Oo,
tingin nyo rito?
lahat yun at saka siguro yung, tinitingnan niya yung legacy kasi nung tatay niya, yung reputation ng tatay niya, tingin ko yun din yung ibig sabihin nun. Although siyempre hindi iba iba naman ang narrative nila 'no. So, obviously he was already courting those who did not support him 'no, during the election. So, at yung sinabi niyang, "Do not be disappointed," ibig sabihin, well, that's also his promise to the rest of the Filipino people that he want to make a difference.
Kayo ba? Were you disappointed with this victory? At somehow, ito bang pakaramdam na ito, kahit papano, nabago after nyo madinig yung kanyang inaugural speech?
Ay hindi pa nagbabago. I'm still ano, on a wait and see, attitude of course, oo. Kasi ano din, eh, yung halimbawa yung cabinet, appointments medyo hit and miss pa siya 'no.
Mm.
So yun yung kasi usually 'di ba yung cabinet appointments yun yung it would, sort of, give you an idea as to the thrust or major thrust of the incoming administration. Pero parang nakakalito yung composition. Parang hindi mo you cannot make sense of ano, kasi merong, datihan na, merong mga wala kang masasabi sa competence like yung recent appointment of, the DFA secretary,
Yeah.
I think
Mm.
very good 'no. So yung gano'n. So medyo hindi pa ako of course, medyo wait and see pa rin talaga ako.
I don't know if you would agree with me, no? Pero ang nakikita ko rin sa appointments niya so far, although hindi pa naman talaga kompleto, no? Nandun talaga yung chunk na political accommodation. At nandun naman
Oo na
talaga yung nakatutok sa competence. In particular, yung economic team.
oo, oo. Oo, tsaka ano kasi, kailangan, 'di ba? Kasi nga may mga surveys during the elections that indicate that the business community is somehow wary of his impending presidency. So I think that is what he was trying to address here, no, dun sa economic team niya, no. And of course, kailangan din naman, no, na gano'n naman no, kahit sinong maging presidente, they need to maintain a semblance of continuity kahit papano, especially if um, yung problema ay napakalaki and kailangan niya ng reliable and competent team.
Okay. O sige, himayin natin ng konting kanyang mga appointees so far. Although very telling na wala pa siyang binabanggit kung sino yung susunod na health secretary, considering na yung speech niya tumutok din dun sa magiging pandemic response tsaka
Oo,
post-pandemic
oo.
recovery. Pero hindi pa natin alam
Yes.
kung sino yung magiging health secretary niya, no? Doon sa mga pinangalanan niya so far, ano sa tingin, sino yung okay? Sino yung sa tingin niyo hindi? Talagang muntik yung mahulog sa upuan. O bakit ito in-appoint?
Well, of course, yung economic team. Tapos yung latest, yung DFA secretary, manalo si Kalida. Yun
Mm.
yung talagang wow, as in wow, no? Kasi masyadong palpable in the sense that, 'di ba, during the campaign, ang daming accusation sa kanya. Nasasabi yung magnanakaw, and then tapos, so dapat, tingin ko, yung mga appointments sa key government agencies that address and prevent corruption should be, no, not only competent, pero yung trustworthy sana, no? At
Oo.
may integrity at walang walang kahit na anong usapin na hindi maganda patungkol sa corruption. So, yun yung parang nakakapagtaka.
Yun nga, speaking of corruption, I don't know kung hindi ko lang nadinig, no? Pero nung pinakinggan ko at binasa ko yung transcript ng speech niya, parang wala yata nabanggit tungkol sa paglaban sa corruption.
Oo, wala nga. Um,
Bakit sa tingin niyo wala?
Alam mo, ang tingin ko nga dun din sa speech niya makikita mo kung bakit siya um, nanalo. Kasi alam niya yung mag magiging sa political base niya, no? Ano yung importante, pagkain, so agrikultura, kalusugan, tapos yung mga OFWs. So
Mm.
yun yung no, yun yung kanyang tinutukan at alam niya na yung usapin ng korapsyon, ah, at least yung hindi pagkapanalo ng ibang kandidato, halimbawa na nag-ano ng korapsyon, eh baka hindi yun yung issue.
Yun nga,
Or
pero bakit?
probably masyado siyang malapit sa kusina. Kaya ayaw din niyang
Anong ibig
ah,
sabihin nun?
yung parang parang baka masabihan siya na parang tingnan mo 'to, 'di ba? Yung gano'n.
Baka hindi believable kasi
Oo,
corruption
yung
yung issue
parang
sa kanya
gano'n.
tsaka sa pamilya niya. Tapos all of a sudden, he would say something, a policy statement about corruption.
Corruption.
Yun
Pero
ba
kung
yun?
ako, yeah, exactly. Kasi nga kung ako sa kanya talagang yun ang tututukan ko, para talagang makita ng mga tao na, well, iba ako, 'di ba?
Eh nga, pero parang kung ikaw yung presidente, pwede mo bang iwasan yung issue ng corruption? Eh alam mo namang
Yeah,
napakalaki ng issue ng corruption sa birokrasya, di ba?
tama ka, hindi talaga 'no.
Oo.
Yun, and siguro gusto niyang meron siyang brand na gustong palabasin, dun sa speech.
Which
Yung,
was,
paulit-ulit, makikita mo na meron siyang gustong maalala, 'no, yung
tama.
sinabi niya na paulit-ulit, "Ang pangarap niyo ay pangarap ko," 'no? 3 o 4 na beses niyang binanggit yun, 'no?
Mm.
Yun yung tingin ko, yun yung parang walang wangwang or walang kama-kamag-anak, yun yung parang version niya nun.
Oo. Bago tayo magtuloy, no, doon sa ibang mga nagtatanong, no, inisip ng iba, ano ba si Kalida? Cabinet member ba yan? Hindi. Siya yung magiging head ng isang independent constitutional body. Ito po yung
Oo, hindi, sorry, hindi
Commission
siya
on Audit.
cabinet, oo.
Napaka-importante po ng posisyon na yan, especially
Mm.
doon sa
Exactly.
promotion ng transparency at paglaban sa corruption. Kaya
Mm.
kung yung mismong credibilidad ng i-appoint doon, ay kine-question ng marami, talaga magkakaroon ng issue regarding the credibility at the very least, no? At
Mm.
saka hindi mo pwedeng basta-basta mapatalsik yan once maupo na yan, di ba? Dahil meron pong fixed term yan, kailangan mo ng impeachment, di ba? Tama po?
Mm, mm.
Oo. Dito naman yung sa ano, kasi binanggit dito economic team, no? So, meron na siyang mga pangalan na binanggit at ina-appoint. Pero, doon sa part ng speech niya, meron siya sinasabi rito na ano eh. Meron siya sinabi na, we are presently, or dapat to, we are currently drawing up a comprehensive, all-inclusive plan for economic transformation. Ayan. Bakit ngayon lang? Hindi ba dapat meron na yan? Hindi naman sa nagninitpick lang
Oo.
tayo, no? Parang inisip ko kasi, di ba, pag tatakbo ka, binubuo mo na yung magiging miyembro ng economic team mo at saka meron na kayong plano para pag upo,
Mm.
o eto yung plano namin. Konting tweaking siguro. They also see it that way.
Yeah, oo. Alam mo ano, dito mo rin makikita na talagang noong kampanya, talagang tinutok nila yung sarili nila kung papaano mananalo.
Mm.
Manalo, hindi lang basta manalo ng gano'ng kalaki 'no, ang margin. At medyo tila hindi talaga masyadong natutukan yung policy issues. Bukod din sa wala rin siguro masyado pang mga tao sa paligid nila at that time who can be relied on 'no, to to sort of craft an agenda. Of course, hindi natin alam what was happening at that time.
Mm.
Pero kasi, dun mo rin makikita kasi kung meron na, during the campaign pa lang, mas mabilis sana, yung appointments.
Oo.
'Di ba?
Hindi.
Minsan kung sino yung nagbi-brief sa'yo during the campaign, usually yun na rin yung mapipili mo dun sa mga, key cabinet positions.
Tama yan. Siguro, konting paliwanag lang sa mga nanonood sa atin, no? Kasi po, tuwing kampanya, yung mga tumatakbo, syempre hindi naman natin sila pwede ma-expect na alam nila lahat. 'Di ba? Lalo kung
Mm.
tumatakbo sa pagkapangulo. So, for example, ako tatakbo for president, nag-aambisyon ako maupo sa Malacanang, may mga bagay ako hindi alam eh. For example, climate issues, climate change, 'di ba? Pwede akong kumuha ng mga eksperto para i-brief ako, para
Mm.
i-craft yung aking plataforma regarding climate change. So yun 'di ba? Yun yung sinasabi nyo.
Mm.
Kunwari, post-pandemic recovery, economic recovery, pwede ako magpa-brief sa ganito mga eksperto, sa mga ekonomista. At kung sakaling ako ngayon manalo, pwede sila yung kukunin ko. Yun yung sinasabi nyo, ba't parang
Oo.
wala pang nabubuo. So
Oo.
what do you think that indicates?
Either during the campaign wala talaga masyadong gustong lumapit sa kanila because of the baggage, that they're bringing into the presidency, or people are still on a wait and see, attitude at the time, or talagang pinili nilang tumutok lang talaga in getting the numbers.
Eto may tanong si Ruel Pine o Ruel Pine. What is realistic to expect during the first 100 days? Ayan.
Oo
Given that
nga,
he didn't commit any target or
oo,
mention any timeline. Although, to be fair to President Marcos, no, sabi niya, ididetalye niya yan, abangan daw natin sa kanyang first State of the Nation
the
address.
nation address, oo.
Okay.
Pero alam mo, ang State of the Nation address kasi, it's really directed more to Congress, 'di
Mm-mm.
ba?
Yung mga
Ah,
batas na gusto niya ipasa.
Oo, yung mga batas. So, and sana yung inauguration would be really the next 6 years. What are the major areas that I will try to develop, or I will try to build, to build on, so that, dire-diretso yung pag-unlad ng Pilipinas. So, yun yung ano. So, ibig sabihin kailangan pa niya talaga ng maraming oras, no?
Pero yun nga, hindi ba medyo parang napapaisip tayo dito kasi nga pag pinagbasihan yung mga surveys, lalo kung ikaw yung nandun sa team ni now President Marcos, alam mo nang mananalo kayo eh. Hindi ba dapat mas ready kayo? Dahil alam nyo mananalo kayo eh.
Oo
And I
nga.
suppose, mas maraming lalapit, mas maraming sisip-sip dahil gusto magpa-appoint, di ba? Pero bakit kulang? Parang bungi-bungi pa nga.
Oo nga, April pa lang 'di ba, parang malinaw na, especially if you are a supporter, 'di ba?
Oo, alam na eh.
I don't know, it's probably because nga wala sila masyado pang ano 'no, makitang tao, and, yun din 'no, nakakabahala din na wala pang Secretary of Health, 'di ba? and we really have to recast our or reform our health system nakita natin yan during the pandemic.
Ito si Jake Danube o Danube. BBM will never be the same as Ferdinand Marcos Sr. His father was a great orator. BBM is not. I'm more convinced kay Duterte nung start niya compared to BBM. Ang harsh niya naman. Although ako, to be fair to him, I thought he delivered it well. No? Although
Yes.
nagbakal siya ng konti doon sa kanyang oath-taking mismo. Pero the way he delivered the speech, uh,
Well,
I think he
oo.
delivered it well.
Of course, he's very far from his father, no? Ano yun eh, the father was one of the brightest of his generation, a great orator, sabi nga ni Jake, no?
Mm.
Ah, pero ano siya eh, pero nandun pa rin yung tinge nung tatay, di ba? Pag
Mm.
nagsasalita siya.
Oo.
Um, he sounded competent, di ba?
Yeah.
Pag nag-aano siya, pag sasalita siya. So yun yung ano dun, yun yung
Pero pero
advantage niya. And it's also refreshing na parang wala ng rambling ano 'to, statements na katulad ni Duterte.
Oo, after Duterte ganun ba? Everything is refreshing.
Oo nga, eh, bumaba na yung standards natin. Hindi naman,
Wala
pero
na nagmumura.
oo, wala na nagmumura.
Wala na nambabastos sa speech.
Oo, yun siguro yung kagandahan nun 'no?
Mm. Pero do you think the speech itself, yung mga gusto niya, yung mga plano niyang gawin sa kanyang panunungkulang, do you think that the delivery was convincing?
No.
Bakit naman?
Of course, the way he delivered it's as if he really knows what he was talking about, no? But what I'm trying to say is kulang pa rin sa detalye. Of course, yung
Mm.
inauguration, you cannot naman, no? You cannot naman uh, it cannot be very detailed, pero just sana parang yung direksyon, no? Kasi ano eh, ibig sabihin wala pa sila masyadong framework, wala pa masyadong what you call this, major themes. Or, di ba usually si Duterte meron siyang 8-point economic agenda or yung mga ganon, di ba?
Mm.
Parang,
Dito wala pa.
yun, parang wala. So, yun yung sigurong hinahanap ko.
Hindi ba kayo na-convince doon sa ano? Kasi one way to put it is that yung speech was more hopeful, aspirational, inspirational, 'di ba? Like what ordinary speeches are supposed to be.
Yeah,
Ah,
oo, andun
oo.
naman yun. Oo, andun naman yun. And, sa akin nga eh, kasi kung 31 million ang bumoto sa'yo, well, of course, you need to inspire people. Pero sa akin, hindi ba mas dapat i-convince mo na lahat na ito na, gagawin ko na sa sobrang dami ng bumoto sa akin, ito seryoso ako. 'Di ba?
Mm.
Pero yun yung ano nga eh, medyo kulang pa.
Mm. Ito, batiin lang natin si Tess Panganiban. Sabi niya, my 90-year-old mom loves
Wow,
this
hello.
program. Grabe naman, nakakatouch. O, sige. Hi po, mami. Mami ni
Ah,
Tess Panganiban. Nanonood pala kayo, ha? Oo. Yun nga. Ito, sige. Speaking of believability or credibility of messaging, no? May isang
mm.
part dito na ano eh. Ito, pangahawakan ko talaga to. Lalo sa dami ng mga trolls ngayon, ha? May binanggit siya rito na ano eh. We shall seek, not scorn dialogue. Listen respectfully to contrary views. Be open to suggestions coming from hard thinking and unsparing judgment. But always from us Filipinos. Okay. Ano ba? Mukha bang convincing yan? Makikinig daw sa mga suggestions at contrary views respectfully.
Oo nga eh, pero ano hindi kasi gano'n yung nakita natin dati, 'di ba?
During the campaign. At hanggang
Oo,
ngayon, 'di ba? Ito, may mga trolls nga ngayon dito sa
oo.
discussion natin. Hoy, kayo mga trolls
Ay,
pa sinabi ng sinusuportahan nyo ng ating pangulo, no? Whether you like it or not. Listen respectfully to contra reviews. In short, huwag kayong bastos So pag bastos kayo, dapat magalit sa inyo si Pangulong Bongbong Marcos.
Yeah, oo. Tsaka yung may sinabi siya na ano, na parang hindi na, medyo contradictory din yung sabi niya kasi, "Now imagine what you and government can achieve together." Pero meron din siyang
Mm.
sinabing, bahala na kayo, ako ng ano 'no, andito lang ang government."
Mm.
Hindi
Yung
ko
ano, yung
I
parang
forget that
hindi
line,
yung
eh.
parang imagine if the government would backstop
Oo.
the ordinary Filipinos, no? Parang diskarte nyo pero hindi namin didiktahan kayo kung ano yung dapat gawin. Ito ba 'yon, yung part na 'yon?
Oo, at saka yung parang ang impression ko yung gobyerno andiyan lang para ibigay yung kung anong gusto niyo. Pero meron din linya na parang you and I should work together. Kasi sabi niya, "You have your own lives to live. And there too, I will help. Government will," eto nakita ko na, "Government will get as much done alone without requiring more from you." So
Mm.
parang yung speechwriter hindi siya masyadong parang, it would have been clearer sana kung mas klaro sana. Um, Hindi ko alam. Minsan kasi kailangan yung speechwriter kilala mo rin yung
Yung
taong
ano,
pinagsusulatan mo ng
yung
speech.
principal mo,
Ideally.
oo.
Oo, ideally.
Boses niya dapat 'yon, hindi boses mo.
Oo,
Sagu
oo. Kaya
sagu
although siguro naman nag-usap sila.
ah, Sagutin lang natin si Eric Art, ayan. Ano
Mm.
'to, masugid na tagapanood 'to, eh, 'no? You call all 31 million trolls, how convenient. Sino ba nagsabing trolls yung 31 million? Baka ikaw nagsabi nun, no? Baka ikaw troll ka. Ako, I didn't call them trolls, ah. Merong
Oo.
trolls dun sa 31 million, pero I'm not saying all of them. A big part of them talagang sinuportahan si
Mm.
President Marcos. And ako personally, I wouldn't dismiss their aspirations or the hope that they put in the new president. May mga reasons yan. Kasi nakakausap ko yung iba dyan, eh. 'Di
Oo.
ba? Kaya ngayon sa tingin ko, 'di ba, Professor Jean, siguro I don't know whether you would agree with this. Nagkaroon din ng problema during the campaign kasi masyadong 'di ba? Masyado sigurong nakatago sa bubble naman yung ibang mga kandidato, 'di ba? They were thinking na hindi, ito ganito dapat ang mag-isip ang mga Pilipino. Hindi naman sila nakikisalamuha masyado, 'di ba?
Oo, oo. Oo, ako nga yung nagtitinda ng buko, diyan sa, kanto namin, very hopeful siya nung inauguration,
Mm.
kahapon. Um,
Oo.
Sana maisip ng mga trolls na ano naman, hindi na pupuri naman tayo 'pag merong maganda, 'pag meron tsaka kasi ano na, may super majority na, 'di ba? Tas
Oo nga.
31 million yung bumoto, hindi naman puwede magiging parang North Korea na tayo kapagka, ah, sang-ayon na naman tayo ng sang-ayon, 'di ba?
Pero bawal yata tumaliwas dito, eh. Although sabi ni mahal na Pangulong Bongbong, kayong mga galit na supporters, again, uulitin ko, sabi ng Pangulo, listen respectfully to contrary views. Ayan. Pangulo na
Mm.
mismo nagsabi niyan. Okay? Eto, to be fair, may nakita akong magandang sinabi rito. Marami magandang sinabi definitely si President Marcos kahapon. Pero ito, very passionate ako rito, eh. May binanggit siya na pinag-uusapan niya infrastructure, 'di ba?
Hmm.
Sabi niya, my father built more and better roads, produced more rights than all administrations
Mm.
before his. Although we need to
Mm.
fact check this, no? Pero may
Oo
binanggit
nga.
siya rito na I am not interested in taking credit. I want to build on success that's already happening. Kasi gusto rin niya ituloy infrastructure project ni President Duterte, and then he's
Mm.
not interested in grabbing credit. Tama yun kasi miski si President Duterte, mga tao niya, they grab credit dun sa mga infrastructure projects na sinimulan ng
Oo,
panahon ni Aquino. The same way na ng panahon ni Aquino, may mga credit grabbing din dun sa mga proyektong sinimulan ng panahon ni Gloria Macapagal-Arroyo. Yan ang problema sa atin, di ba?
oo. Pero yung windmills, the way I
Oo,
understand
tama.
is that gino project yon, it's an international project, pero it was done during his term yata as governor. Siyempre hindi
Yeah.
rin naman magagawa yun kung wala yung kanyang support. Kailangan naman laging ganyan, 'no? Yung doon sa mga infrastructure projects, alam mo mahirap talaga ano 'no, kasi may mga infrastructure projects 'di ba, kailangan pipirmahan. Matagal 'yan, eh.
Yeah.
'Pag napirmahan ngayon, maaaring ang implementation sa next administration pa, sa tagal. So
Mm.
talagang mahirap angkinin yun kasi ano, it transcends administration. Kasi we're talking about big ticket items here, 'di ba? Hindi
Yeah.
naman minsan natatapos.
Mm. Okay, Professor Jean Franco, thank you very much for joining us tonight. Yan, may tumatawag na sa inyo.
Yeah, oo.
Baka nagagalit na sa mga sinabi nyo. Ayan,
Hindi, hindi.
again, sa mga supporters ni President
Mm.
Marcos, ha? Siya na mismo nagsabi, ha?
Okay.
Listen
Oo.
respectfully to contra
Oo.
reviews, okay? So, huwag kayong troll behavior dyan. Professor Jean, as always, maraming salamat sa inyo.
Oo, thanks for having me, Christian. Thank you. Good night.
Good night po, good night. Okay, so that was our first topic. Medyo mag-English na ako ng konting yan because our guest is an American, okay? We need to speak in English, okay? So for this particular portion of our discussion, we have Mr. Gregory Poling. He is the director of the Asia Maritime Transparency Initiative of the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Good evening, Greg. Or good morning there. Where are you? Washington?
I'm outside of Washington, Christian. Although I don't know what time it is because I got back from the Philippines early this week, and then I was on another plane last night that got delayed till 2 a.m. So
Yeah.
good evening, good afternoon. My brain doesn't know.
Good day, good day. How are you? You were in the Philippines. You did what? I understand you launched a book, right?
I did. So I was in. I spent 2 days in Manila, two in Cebu, two in Puerto Princesa. I was originally there because the Philippine Air Force invited me to speak at their annual conference. It was the first time they had returned in person at the Manila Marriott next to VMware Air Base. But then I stuck around for a week to do book launch events. Now, unfortunately, my book was delayed because everything in COVID is delayed. So I didn't
But
actually have copies on hand like I had hoped to. But they were still good events.
but by the way, what's the title of your book and when is this going to be available?
So it's called On Dangerous Ground: America's Century in the South China Sea. As it indicates, it's a kind of the South China Sea story written from an American perspective. So the history of U.S. involvement, which is pretty tightly bound up in the history of the U.S. Philippine alliance. It launched this morning on Kindle for those who like to read on their Kindles or their phones, and then the hard copies will start shipping in the U.S. A week from today.
Okay, let's talk about the South China Sea Challenge to our new president, the president of the Philippines, President Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr. He had his inauguration already yesterday. And we didn't hear much about his foreign policy during the campaign or during the inauguration, but there were certain statements that propped up during the campaign. For example, the invocation of the arbitral victory in 2016. In your case, what kind of challenge are you seeing for this new administration, given the strategic importance of the Philippines, both for China, the United States, and other powers in this part of the world?
The administration is coming into power in a tough spot because the previous administration spent 6 years ignoring the 2016 arbitration award. And at least the first 3 or 4 years of the Duterte government were spent kind of ignoring the whole West Philippine Sea issue overall. The result is that the Philippines, only in the last year to two, has really started thinking through how to end the alliance with the Americans and how to more proactively pursue its rights in the West Philippine Sea, while China's spent all of this time getting stronger and taking more than it had and building up its facilities in the islands. So the Marcos administration comes in with the deck stacked against it far more than the Duterte government had in 2016.
And how do you think the new administration should proceed from here on?
Look, I'm always hesitant to give advice to partner governments. My job is to give advice to the U.S. government. Um, the most important thing I think for both countries at the moment, the government seems to have decided, is to tighten the alliance. So we've seen a lot of work since Secretary of Defense Austin visited Manila last July and Secretary Lorenzana returned the visit to Washington in August. A lot of effort spent on deepening and modernizing and fixing the alliance because at the end of the day, there are no military solutions to the South China Sea, but military deterrence has to be part of the strategy, preventing China from simply using force to resolve this in Beijing's favor, particularly toward the Sierra Madre.
Mm. Okay, Sierra Madre. This is of course BRP Sierra Madre, which has long been beached on Ayungin Shoal, right? Um, let's talk about the friendship that was established by former President Rodrigo Duterte with China. We've heard the assessments regarding that. Many experts were saying that that particular closeness of ties that was established by the former president didn't exactly benefit the Philippines from the big perspective or using that big picture. But here you have the new president, Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., who has also been trumpeting the so-called friendship or closeness even between his family and Beijing. How do you think this could benefit the Philippines, or whether we are bound to actually experience the same experience that we had during the Duterte administration when it comes to Beijing?
I hope it will not be the same experience. If China was a friend to the Duterte government, it was a very abusive friend, a friend that never paid its bills, and then took advantage of the Philippines at every turn. Everything that we've heard from President Marcos suggests that he's going to attempt some outreach to Beijing, and I suppose that's natural. Every president comes in wanting, understandably, to find some path forward, some diplomatic way ahead. And I'm afraid there simply isn't one. If there was, the Duterte government would have found it in the first 3 to 4 years when they were doing everything they could to reach out to China. The fact is, China doesn't want to compromise. It has no incentive to cut any
Why?
deals with Manila because it's winning every day. Every single day, China is in more control of fishing and oil and gas and law enforcement operations and everything else in the South China Sea, and it pays no cost so far for that bad behavior. So why should it compromise with the Philippines? And on the other hand, the Philippines needs, wants Chinese investment, loans, capital, and we saw over the course of the Duterte presidency that China made a lot of promises and delivered very little of the economic largesse that was promised. So I expect that there will be flirtations under the new administration, but I also think this administration is so far being staffed with professionals, competent bureaucrats who know their history, their recent history, and are going to be far more skeptical of China than Duterte's government was in the beginning.
Okay, you mentioned that China doesn't want any compromises because basically it has been getting its way. Whatever it wanted, basically, it was able to achieve. But on the other hand, we also heard experts before say that if China wanted really to be respected and acknowledged as a superpower, someone to be respected within the international community, it also has to play by the rules. Don't you think this face-saving aspect should also work in the case of the Philippines to be able to, let's say, demand China to play by the rules at least more?
I think there's a lot of truth to that if the Philippines actually demands that China play by the rules, right? China's so far what China has been able to do is treat its immediate neighbors in this bullying, coercive way, but then not pay any cost for that on the global stage because the Philippines doesn't raise it globally, the Vietnamese don't raise it globally. You know, it's been 6 years since the arbitration award. The Philippines has never raised the arbitration award in the UN General Assembly. It's never brought it up publicly at any other multinational fora. So, in theory, if the Philippine government, with support from the US and Japan and other partners, tried to make this a problem for China on the international stage, I do think that then there would be incentive for Beijing to compromise because then it would start to eat away at China's bigger goals of global leadership. But so far, that simply hasn't happened.
So you don't see any incentive so far on the part of China to be able to respect the arbitral ruling because we're not basically raising it. Which is related to this question by one of our viewers. Do you think the arbitral tribunal's award or decision favoring the Philippines would be leveraged by Bongbong Marcos? Or perhaps to add to this question, how do you think he should leverage this victory, this legal victory by the Philippines?
Well, look, I certainly hope so. The incoming Secretary of National Defense seems to care a great deal about the West Philippine Sea. The DFA is staffed with professionals who care, and I think left to their own devices would love to raise the arbitral award in the UN and ASEAN meetings and every other fora they can think of. Um, I don't know what the president thinks about how to use the arbitral award. I'm not sure that anybody does. He's never really talked about it. Um, if it were used, I do think it would be effective. So the reason that um, China has not complied with the ruling to date is because there's no direct mechanism to make it, right? There's no policeman who's going to kick in Xi Jinping's bedroom door and force him to comply with his arbitration order. That's not the way arbitrations work. International law works because countries see the costs of violating the law as outweighing the benefits. And even for great powers, the Americans, the Brits, the Russians, and before that the Soviets, they complied with the vast majority of arbitrations because it was a headache not to. There was an opportunity cost involved in being seen as violators of international law. China hasn't been made to pay that opportunity cost yet, so we don't know what it would take for China to have to comply.
And basically, in terms of how the international community views us, and perhaps let's talk about missed opportunities. How much missed opportunities did the Philippines have, given the fact that former President Duterte didn't really raise this arbitral victory? And now, in case the new administration decides to raise that, what kind of credibility or face would we have before the international community?
Look, the Philippine government had a very unique opportunity on July 12th, 2016. The entire world was focused on the West Philippine Sea issue for one day. And the Aquino government, with a lot of support from like-mindeds in Australia and the US and Japan and Europe, had spent about a year up to that day rallying support, right? Every Philippine embassy in the world was tasked with making sure that their host government was prepared to issue a statement in support of the arbitration award. And that had really worked. 56 countries had gone on the record in advance saying that they would demand compliance with the ruling. And that included every country in Europe, along with all the usual suspects of the US and Canada and New Zealand, Australia, and so on. And then all of that was allowed to disappear on July 12th because these countries were willing to stand up on behalf of the Philippines if the Philippines was going to stand up itself. But when Manila signaled that it wasn't going to do anything and it wasn't going to ask for support, most of those countries kept quiet. So now the Marcos administration or any future administration faces a difficulty of having to rebuild that coalition from scratch because the Duterte government just gave it all away. That's a real problem.
So basically, how do you push the reset button? Because I remember I was covering one ASEAN summit before. I was told that Vietnam and Malaysia were very frustrated with the Philippines early on because we were not invoking or citing the arbitral victory when they wanted that explicitly mentioned in the ASEAN declaration or ASEAN statement, right? So again, moving forward, years later, how do we push the reset button?
It's going to take hard work. I now the one benefit that the Marcos administration has is that over the last really 2 years, you've seen countries step up themselves because they've begun to again see the South China Sea as directly their interests. So the Germans, for the first time, called for China to comply with the ruling about a year and a half ago. The French and the Brits have issued more clear positions on their legal objections to China's claims. So I think there's something there that can be built on, but it will take work. I mean, there's probably 10 or 15 countries that are going to be easy to get, and the rest of the 54, they're going to take hard work because not only have they largely moved on to other issues, but they're going to be highly skeptical of the ability of a Philippine government now to follow through because the last Philippine government changed course overnight.
But the fact that we have a new foreign secretary in Secretary Enrique Manalo, don't you think that could signal some stability in the part of the Philippines? He
I
is a
think
career diplomat, well respected.
yes, and look, Secretary Manalo was heavily involved in the preparation for Judgment Day on July 12th. He was Undersecretary of Foreign Affairs at the time. He had a hand in helping craft this international coalition. He was, in addition, the lead negotiator for quite some time on the Code of Conduct talks with the rest of ASEAN. So he knows this issue inside and out, and he knows how much hard work particularly the Aquino government, put into building that coalition. If he's given the green light by Malacanang, I have no doubt that he'll get to work rebuilding.
Mm. And by the way, the structures that were built by China, the reclamation in portions of the South China Sea, including the West Philippine Sea, are basically completed, right? They have been
Yeah, I
completed.
mean, they've been completed for years and years. So
Yeah.
the islands themselves were built basically by mid 2016. All the land mass was done, and then all the structures, the runways and the missile shelters and the fuel storage, all of that was done by the end of 2017. So
Mm.
when we talk about militarization of the South China Sea islands, we're not really talking about building anymore. We're talking about what China uses them for, what kind of
Yeah.
deployments go out. The maritime militia and the Coast Guard, of course, they've been out there every day for at least the last 5 years. The only really new thing we've seen of late is China's begun much more regularly flying patrol aircraft, big patrol aircraft, off of the runways in the Spratlys. And that's important for China because it lets China maintain a 24-hour a day intelligence collection capability over the West Philippine Sea. It's also very important for China's Navy because China has two aircraft carriers it wants to operate, but those aircraft carriers can't launch big patrol aircraft, so they need nearby runways to do it for them.
So you don't see China building any new structures anymore because what they had planned to build had been completed already.
I would be surprised if we saw new structures in the Spratlys. China doesn't need more, right? It has more than it needs at this point. It has three air and naval bases in the Spratly Islands. Those are pretty redundant. It could, I could imagine, build something small, unmanned platforms or tiny outposts on places like Bajo de Masinloc,
Yeah,
just to stake
Scarborough.
a claim. But I don't see a new big island going in because it's not really clear what it's needed for.
Yeah, because I remember there was this concept. I think it came from the Japanese, the so-called strategic triangle, right?
You know,
And the other corner of that was Bajo de Masinloc, right? Scarborough Shoal.
right. So this concept, and there's certainly some credibility to it. Is if you look at where China has facilities in the South China Sea, they have one air and naval base up on Woody Island in the Paracels. They have three in the Spratlys. The only place they don't have a place to launch planes is at Scarborough, at Bal de Masinloc. My argument would be, I think there's some truth to that on the surveillance side. China probably wants to have radar and signals intelligence and communications facilities on the reef because then it can better monitor Luzon, all U.S. Philippine activity in and out of Manila Bay and Subic Bay, and it can also monitor the Strait of Taiwan.
Mm.
But that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to build a big airstrip or a new Navy base or anything like that. I think that would be a pretty small facility.
But somehow, do you think they were able to close the loop, so to speak, already, as far as China is concerned?
Well, day in and day out, they probably do it with vessels. I mean, there are probably a dozen Chinese vessels at Bajo de Masinloc today as we speak. I haven't looked at the latest satellite images, but there's always Chinese boats at the reef. China maintains aerial patrol over the reef, and it can do it from the mainland. It has airstrips close enough that it can do that. So I think that there's probably some plan in a filing cabinet somewhere in PLA headquarters that eventually we're going to build some small, probably unmanned outpost on the reef. But I'm not sure that they're in any rush.
Okay. So what other activities are you expecting China to do in the coming months to be able to somehow firm up their presence in that area?
A lot of it has now become almost routine, right? Every new oil and gas exploration activity by any of the Southeast Asian countries has been blocked for at least the last 4 years. Most recently, the Philippine government tried to start new exploration at Recto Bank in April and were blocked by the China Coast Guard, and so again halted any new exploration. The same is true for the Malaysians and the Vietnamese and Indonesians, and that'll keep up. Continued pressure on fishing, and particularly by China's maritime militia. Continued pressure on the resupply missions to Ayungin Shoal, to the Sierra Madre. I think China's goal here is to just keep pushing and pushing and pushing until more and more of the peacetime activity becomes impossible or too risky and too expensive. And Beijing's getting to the point where it's basically impossible for Manila or any other Southeast Asian government to attract foreign investment in the oil and gas sector. So really, Chinese companies are the only ones who you can get to do this drilling. Um, Between that and the increasing impossibility of fishing, China's pretty close to controlling the South China Sea without ever having to fight for it.
Again, they are close to controlling the South China Sea without having to fight or fire a
If they,
single shot.
yeah, if China gets to the point where the only ships that can operate without Chinese permission are the U.S. Navy and the Philippine Navy, then it's already won.
Yeah.
Because if Filipino civilians can't operate, and Vietnamese civilians, and Indonesian civilians, then international law is already dead in the West Philippine
Mm.
Sea. China has accomplished its goal.
How about the other countries? Canada, Australia, even the French and the Britons. How important is it for them to actually be part of this phone ops?
Hmm. I think that it's seen as extremely important by the Japanese and the Australians. I think that for the rest of this potential coalition, the French, the British, the Germans, the Canadians, the Kiwis, there's interest. It's seen as an important issue, but I'm not sure it's seen as critical in the way that the Americans and the Japanese see it. Partially that's because these countries don't have the same relationship with the Philippines, so they don't view it as direct a security threat. You know, the U.S. has to worry about the Mutual Defense Treaty and the Article 5 commitment. The Japanese and the Australians have extremely close and growing military ties with the Filipinos, so there's a more direct stake there. For the rest of the countries, this is more abstract. It's a question of the law, and they're very worried about how Chinese claims undermine the law, but it's a bit distant from their day to day. And the only way to change that is going to be to have claimant countries,
Mm.
presumably the Philippines, because the Vietnamese have been unwilling to do it, to have Philippine diplomats go in and demand their assistance, demand their support. That would help drive this up the agenda for the rest.
Okay. So if the Philippines, under the new administration of President Bongbong Marcos, would want to actually push the reset button and actually make use of our legal victory in 2016, which particular partners or allies should the Philippines focus on?
The Europeans are the most important party here. I know we all like to say ASEAN, but ASEAN's really not. If we, when it comes down to this, what's going to compel China to comply with the ruling is the weight of international opinion. If the ruling, if its non-compliance with the ruling begins to impose so much reputational cost on Beijing that it makes it harder for China to do other things around the world that it wants to do, then it will look for compromise. And the most important block out there as part of that coalition are the, nearly 30 countries that the Philippines could get to sign on either as members of the EU or as affiliated members who had previously signed statements back in 2017 saying that, 2016 saying that they would call for compliance with the ruling. So getting them back, that could start a ripple effect that brings other countries on board as well.
Okay. Finally, why are you quite pessimistic about ASEAN at this stage? I, I think I know the answer to my question, but I want to I wanted to come from you.
I am skeptical of ASEAN as an organization playing an effective role on the West Philippine Sea. That doesn't mean that individual countries aren't important.
Yeah.
Singapore, Vietnam, Indonesia, perhaps Malaysia. These are to a degree like minded. They share Philippine concerns. They will be helpful down the line, and there must be coordination with them. But do I think that you're going to convince Laos
Yeah.
to irritate China, who now controls more than 50% of its sovereign debt,
Yeah.
over fishing
Very, very true.
rights at Scarborough Shoal? No. I think if Laos has a veto, or if Cambodia or Thailand even have a veto over Philippine rights in the West Philippine Sea, then the Philippines is going to lose.
Yeah, I think they also have to deal with the so-called ASEAN centrality, and before they could come up with the decision, it has to be unanimous. And part of the criticism of ASEAN is that that particular idea of centrality is the one that has been stunting the development of the region, right?
That's right. ASEAN has been talking, negotiating with China on a code of conduct for at least the last 24 years. The Philippines was tasked with writing the first draft of the code of conduct by ASEAN back in 1998. In 24 years, no progress has been made.
Yeah.
The only thing that's changed is that China is in a better position because China continues to unilaterally change the status quo while the Philippines feels compelled to talk and talk and talk, lest it be accused of undermining ASEAN centrality.
And do you think a code of conduct, a legally binding one, would be more detrimental to the interests of the Philippines and other ASEAN countries and be more beneficial to China if it is signed or completed at this time?
Well, it would depend on the details. I obviously a bad code of conduct is worse than no code at all. Um,
Yeah.
Now, to date, the Vietnamese in particular have been very good at blocking all bad Chinese proposals. Philippines has been back and forth depending on who was SFA at the time. So, but in general, I don't really have a lot of fear that ASEAN is going to sign a bad code with China. The problem is that China's not interested in signing a good one. So the real question is abandon the code process or continue to talk forever with no end in sight.
Okay. Gregory Poling, thank you for joining us on the program. Always a pleasure. God bless.
Thank you, Christian. It's great to see you again.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. So again, that was the discussion regarding the challenge posed by the maritime and territorial dispute in the South China Sea on the new administration of Bongbong Marcos, and I hope that particular discussion has been useful for you. Okay, dalawa po yan, no? Maritime dispute at saka territorial dispute. Okay, wala na po tayo dapat dispute. Ito sinasabi to ng mga eksperto, no? Dapat hindi na sinasabi na disputed ang West Philippine Sea. Kasi nga po nandun na yung nandun na po yung ruling ng Permanent Court of Arbitration. Consistent po doon sa nakasulat sa ITLOS, International Convention on the Law of the Sea. Diba? So, ang pinag-aawayan na lang dyan, bakit hindi po nire-respeto ng China yung decision na yon. Legal po yon at nakasulat na po yon. At let's see kung gagamitin po itong ruling na ito, itong naipanalo natin ng bagong administrasyon. Kasi ang tagal po nang inintay natin under President Duterte, hindi po ginamit ang ating arbitral victory. Okay? Sabi nila, mas magagaling sila ron sa larangan na yan, mukhang hindi po naging effective. So let's see kung paano po yan magiging effective dito sa darating na, dito sa kasalukuyang administrasyon ngayon. Now at this point, punta po tayo rito sa ating third topic. Okay? So kaninang umaga po, kaninang hapon ba or umaga? Okay, today, nilaunch na po yung Angat Buhay NGO, Angat Buhay Program ni former Vice President Len Robredo. Matagal niya na po ito yung pinangako. So, yung Angat Buhay Program, sinabi niya bago siya bumaba sa pwesto, it would be converted into a non-governmental organization. Okay? Bago ko tawagin yung guest natin, linawin ko lang po doon sa mga salbahing nagpapakalat ng peking impormasyon. Ang NGO po, hindi po ibig sabihin yan, New Government Order. Sobrang katangahan po yun, yung pinapakalat na impormasyon na yun. NGO po, non-governmental organization. And at this point, I'd like to welcome the Executive Director of Angat Buhay Program, of the Angat Buhay Program, of former Vice President Len Robredo. Welcome to the program, Rafi Magno. Magandang gabi
Hi,
sa'yo.
Christian. Magandang gabi.
Tama ba, Executive Director?
Tama, Christian.
Pasensya ka na, gumamit ako ng medyo marahas na pananalita kasi talaga nakakapikon na yung pagpapakalat ng peking impormasyon. No? Pati ba naman yung terminolohiya ng NGO, binababoy nitong mga walang kakwenta-kwentang trolls na to. Okay, sige, ngiti na tayo ng konti. Okay? Kumusta? So, na-launch na ang Angat Buhay Program today, tama ba?
Yes, kaninang umaga lang.
Okay. So, ano ba tong Angat Buhay Program na to? What can you expect? What's different about this?
Yes, yung Angat Buhay program that we launched early this morning, no. Ang pagkakaiba niya lang talaga doon sa Angat Buhay program of the Office of the Vice President ay yung una, yung office of yung Angat Buhay program's Office of the Vice President is a government program mainly funded by the Office of the Vice President and through its partners. No? Pero yung pagkakaiba ngayon, sinabi mo na nga kanina yung definition ng NGO, no? It's a non-government organization already. So, yun lang yung pinaka pagkakaiba niya. And siguro at the same time, na downsides, no, yung capacity ng Angat Buhay, dahil mula sa grupo or sa isang opisina na 60, halos 60 yung nagtatrabaho dito, sa non-government organization, siyam na lang kami, no.
9 na lang kayo.
9 na lang kami. Of course, with the support of our board of trustees, no? Pero yung entire staff namin, siyam na lang talaga.
Siyam na lang. Pero
So yun na lang yung pagkakaiba. But when we talk about its thrusts, no? Yung priority programs of Angat Buhay, the Angat Buhay now, para lang klaro sa lahat, no? It's the flagship anti-poverty program of Angat Pinas Incorporated. So that's our corporate name, na na-register sa SEC, but we will still use the brand Angat Buhay, no, para talaga may continuity. But
Okay.
again, going back, no, that the thrusts, lahat ng priority projects still the same, no, katulad ng ginagawa natin sa Angat Buhay sa Office of the Vice President.
Okay. Sige, idetalye natin, no? How exactly will this Angat Buhay program help Filipinos at this time, moving forward? Hindi na siya Vice President.
Yes. So sa NGO natin, sa Angat Buhay NGO, may apat, no, na pangunahing thrusts, no, or priorities. Una din dito, yung food security, nutrition, and universal healthcare, no. Isa sa mga layunin ng Angat Buhay NGO ay makapag-provide, no, ng interventions lalo na doon sa mga wasted and severely wasted na mga kabataan, no. Alam natin na yung stunting, irreversible na siya sa mga kabataan, lalo na pag lumampas na ng 5 years old, at gusto natin yung maagapan with the help of our institutional partners katulad ng Negrense Volunteers for Change Foundation na matagal na nating nakakasama sa Angat Buhay, no. Ipagpapatuloy natin yung ating mga nutrition programs sa iba't ibang parte ng Pilipinas, para matugunan, no, yung kakulangan at yung ma-fill in yung gaps, no, ng iba't ibang mga local government units to address yung concerns sa stunting and malnutrition.
Rafi,
Aside from
sorry
this,
Prof, Rafi, isa-isahin natin kasi gusto ko i-detalye ito. Ito, very passionate ako dito sa issue ng stunting, no? So ito, paano siya? Feeding program ba ito?
yes, it's a feeding program, no, but we want to call it a nutrition program, no. Para mas holistic, no. Kasi yung feeding program, 'di ba, yung usual na connotation diyan, magpapakain ka lang, no, kahit anong pagkain basta pinapakain. While it's good, no, pero I think we really need to focus on nutrition program, no, for kids, no. Kasama na dito, holistic siya, na sinabi ko kanina, kasi kasama na dito yung pagsisiguro na this will be a sustainable nutrition program for kids, no, affected by malnutrition and stunting. Ibig sabihin din ito, sisiguraduhin natin na may local sources na makukuha yung pamilya nila, lalong-lalo na yung mga nanay na nag-prepare ng pagkain nila, institutions katulad ng paaralan, no, na may nutritious na food, no, na makukuha, hindi dahil kailangan namin magdala doon ng kung ano-anong klaseng pagkain, pero dahil merong available sa kanilang community. So meron silang pagkakataon na magtanim ng mga gulay sa kanilang backyard or sa kanilang paaralan na pwedeng gamitin, no, sa mga nutrition program na i-offer sa mga kabataan. Ano to? Sobrang sanga-sanga kasi may pagkakataon, aside from yung readily available yung mga gulay, pagkakataon din para mag-iitong source ng livelihood ng nanay. Yung isa sa problema natin sa nutrition program ay yung sustainability, no. Kasi may mga pagkakataon na nawawala na sila doon sa estado ng pagiging malnourished, no, but dahil hindi na sustain ng pamilya, no, yung kailangan na nutrisyon ng mga kabataan, bumabalik sila doon sa dati nilang estado, just because, no, wala din kakayahan yung magulang nila to really sustain, no, yung ganong klaseng programa para sa kanilang mga anak. So it's really a holistic program, no, to address this. But of course, no, again, unlike yung Office of the Vice President, we'll start small and we'll make sure that it's a working program so that we can replicate it to other municipalities or provinces in the Philippines.
So in short, hindi ito yung dole out na pupunta kayo sa isang lugar, magpapakain. Ito, you will empower the communities to make it more
Yes,
self-sustaining.
parang yung dole out never siyang naging consideration palagi
Oo.
ng angat buhay, no? Kasi I think yan yung pinaka mababang klase ng pagtulong, no?
Oo.
Sa ating mga kababayan. While again, it's good, but I think um, dapat bagi tayong very serious in addressing these concerns. Kasi pangit naman na pupunta ka lang doon, magpapakain, and at the same time, and at the
Oo.
end of the day, iiwan mo na yung community, di ba? So
Oo.
I guess for the past 6 years, hindi ganong klaseng pamamaraan yung binibigay naming programa sa mga kababayan natin.
Dagdagan ko lang, Rafi, kasi yung ganyang mga kalakaran, galawan niya ng mga trapo yung dole out, no? Magbibigay sila ng resources, ng tulong, tapos in the end, ang tingin sa kanila, patron, di ba? So para bang hindi matutuloy itong programa to pag yung politiko na wala sa pwesto. So yun ang hindi nyo ipinapasok dito sa programa na ito. Yung patronage aspect.
Oo, kasi again, we're serious, no, doon sa dinidisenyo nating programa para sa ating mga kababayan.
Okay. Ito siguro dagdagan mo na rin din, no? Kaya nabanggit ko kanina, very passionate ako dito sa issue ng malnutrition, no? Ako kasi tinitingnan ko big picture, no? Bakit iniisip nila, bakit daw maraming mahirap? Tingnan nyo, di ba? Parang hindi pa pinapanganak yung isang Pilipino, talo na agad di ba? Yung opportunities,
Mm-mm.
the odds are already against that baby. Hindi pa pinapanganak no? Papanganak ka
Mm-mm.
sa mahirap na pamilya, walang pambili ng gatas mo, nagtitiis yung iba, binibigyan ng binibigyan ng tubig. Imagine, di ba, binabanggit mo yung crucial yung first 5 years, no? So
Mm-mm.
imagine kung wala kang sapat na nutrisyon bilang bata at ilang milyong Pilipino yung nasa ganyang sitwasyon, anong klaseng mamamayan ang magiging sila pagdating ng araw? And it becomes a very vicious cycle. Kaya nga
Mm-mm.
napaka-importante na tutukan itong malnutrition, itong nutritional needs sa mga tao at this particular time. Diba? Tama ba?
Yes, oo, kasi yung isa sa mga goals nito, no, hindi lang to address, no, yung concerns nga sa malnutrition. Ito ay pagbibigay ng patas na pagkakataon
Mm-mm.
para sa mga kabataang Pilipino na magkaroon ng fighting chance, no. Hindi man
Yeah.
sila makapag-aral sa magandang paaralan, no, pero sila naman ay malusog at may kakayanan na makapagtapos, makapaghanap buhay, makatulong sa kanilang pamilya. So, yan talaga yung pinakabuod, yan talaga yung pinaka-root, no, why we decided, no, to pursue yung advocacy natin for food security, nutrition, and universal healthcare. Actually, even sa Attorney Lenny, ito ang pinaka una niyang sinasabi sa napakaraming trusts, no, and priority projects ng Angat Buhay.
Oo, kasi talo ka na agad 'di ba? Pag yung brain development mo talaga na compromise, parang paano ako makakasabay doon sa iba? Tapos yung iba naman
Mm-mm.
dismissively. Bakit itong ganitong, 'di ba? Marami tayong
Mm-mm.
nadidinig na ganyang comments, very dismissive, very condescending, sabihin. Itong mga to, ang bobobo, 'di ba? Bakit ganito yung choices nila sa pagdating sa politika? Bakit ganito sila bumoto, 'di ba? Minsan hindi natin tinitingnan yung big picture Kasi wala talaga marami sa ating Pilipino hindi nabigyan ng fighting chance So malaking bagay ito. Okay, sorry mukhang busy si Rafi.
No, it's okay, sorry.
Okay lang ba?
Nagsasabay-sabay lang ng
Pasensya
trabaho,
ka
but
na.
okay yun.
Pasensya ka na. Sige, next, ano yung priorities pa? So ito, binanggit mo, food security, nutrition, tsaka universal healthcare. Ano pa yung mga magiging
Alright,
prioridad?
yung
At paano
pangalawa is
makikinabang in concrete terms yung mga Pilipino?
Yes, yung pangalawa is public education. No? Again, yung pangarap natin ay magkaroon or ma-achieve natin, no? Yung accessible and inclusive quality education for each Filipino child. A day before we officially launched Angat Buhay, we had our MOA signed, no, with the Rotary Club of Makati, kasama yung Southern Luzon State University, no, SU, sa Quezon, to build dormitories, no, a dormitory rather for
Mm.
25 indigent students, no, na nangangailangan ng suporta para sa kanilang pag-aaral. Actually, we have I guess less than 10, no, na dormitories all over the Philippines noong kami ay nasa Office of the Vice President pa lang, no. Meron sa Negros Oriental, sa Shayan, Zamboanga del Norte at sa iba pang mga lugar, no. Basically, we want to address, no, yung absenteeism ng mga kabataan just because sobrang layo ng paaralan mula sa kanilang mga pamayanan or mula sa kanilang bahay. So we want to to bring them closer to schools, no? Para hindi sila dihado just because nakatira sila sa malayong lugar, hindi nila kayang pumunta sa kanayunan, no? Sila ay hindi na makakapagtapos or makakapag-aral. So gusto natin dalhin yung mga kabataan malapit sa kanilang mga paaralan.
Okay.
We are partnering with AGAP. AGAP naman provides classrooms, no, para sa mga kabataan sa kinder at nagta-transition, no, to grade 1. Itong AGAP schools, no, we are redesigning this, no, to also serve as tawag mo dito, evacuation centers, no? Doon sa mga lugar na prone sa pagbabaha, no, at sa iba't iba pang mga kalamidad, no. We tried this already in Bicol, no, in Calabanga, where yung school ay nasa taas, tapos yung at sa baba ay ginagamit as a multipurpose center. Pero pag nagkakaroon din ng sakuna, ginagamit yung second floor as evacuation center, no. Again, ang gusto natin na ang goal natin dito is to provide, no, facilities, so that yung pag-facilitate ng learning delivery ay mas maging kaaya-aya, lalong-lalo na doon sa mga kabataan na nangangailangan talaga ng atensyon, no. Sinabi na namin kanina, ito isa sa mga paborito ko dahil ito ay nabuo noong pandemya, no. Yung community learning hubs, meron kaming almost 130 community learning hubs all over the Philippines, no. And we are transforming them to remedial centers. Isa sa mga malungkot na aral na nakuha namin at talagang pumukaw sa amin noong ini-implement yung community learning hubs ay napakaraming mga non-readers pa na minsan nga umaabot ng grade 5 or grade 6 pero hindi pa rin ganun kahusay magbasa. So what we're going to do is that we are transforming our CLHS to remedial centers specifically for reading and mathematics. To assist, no, yung mga non-readers natin at makahabol sila, no. Most of the time ito yung insecurity, no, ng mga kabataang Pilipino at nagiging dahilan kung bakit hindi na sila nagpapatuloy sa pag-aaral dahil hindi sila nakakapagbasa. Not because bobo sila or mangmang sila, no, pero talagang kulang lang yung pagkakataon, yung oportunidad, no, para mas matuto sila ng maayos. And we hope to fill in the gaps, no, lalong-lalo na doon sa mga local government units or mga areas na kailangan talaga ito. So
By the way,
basically,
before you continue, yung local government units ba, open ba sila rito? Nakausap niyo na ba sila dito sa
yes,
expansion nito?
oo. I guess through the years naman, even sa Office of the Vice President, yung Angat Buhay program is not a political program. It's really a developmental program na dinisenyo natin to really fill in the gaps, no? So, wala ditong pinag-uusapan ng kalaban, wala ditong pinag-uusapan na kaalyado. Of course, it's easier for us to work with a local government unit na open, no? Kasi mahalaga sa amin ang suporta ng local government unit to sustain our programs. Lalong-lalo na sa mga communities na mga mahihirap, no? So, again, napakaraming local government units ang supportive, no, sa ating programa.
Okay. Ano yung third natin? Third and fourth, no?
Third natin, diretso ko na din sa fourth, no? Yung disaster relief and rehabilitation. Yung DRR sa Angat Buhay, we're very clear na hindi siya risk reduction, no, dahil wala yun sa kapasidad namin at sa
Sa gobyerno
mandato
na yun,
namin.
tsaka community.
Oo.
So,
But kami, very particular kami with relief and rehabilitation. I guess, isa sa mga brand ng Angat Buhay yung immediate na pagbibigay ng tulong or interventions doon sa mga communities na nasalanta ng bagyo, ng pagsabog ng bulkan, ng apoy, etc., no. Of course, aside from provision of immediate relief assistance, we would also like to assist, no, sa rehabilitation phase. No? At most of the time, ang rehabilitation ang hindi sexy or hindi mabenta, lalong-lalo na kapag nagpa-fundraise. No? Kasi di ba parang pagkakatapos lang ng bagyo, lahat gustong tumulong. And through the years, no, minsan napapabayaan na rin, no, yung mga nasalanta ng bagyo, ng gera katulad ng Marawi, no, na matagal bago sila makabangon. At we will remain committed, no, to supporting rehabilitation projects. That's just like what we did, no, immediately after the Marawi siege, no. Actually, when yung siege ay nagsa-start pa lamang, nagbe-brainstorm na kami how to possibly respond, no, doon sa rehabilitation needs. And I guess that's the reason why we're the first purely privately funded na village, no, Angat Buhay Village, na napatayo natin sa barangay Sagonsongan in Marawi City. But aside from disaster relief and rehabilitation, I guess the difference, no, doon sa OVPs, Angat Buhay and Angat Pinas Incorporated's Angat Buhay is yung community engagement, no. So we would like to really put our volunteers at the center of our projects, no. We want to support them, capacitate them so that they can also implement their own local their own development projects in their localities, no. But at the same time, we want to partner with them, no, so that we have enough human resource on the ground, no, to implement, no, monitor, and even ideate, no, improve our projects, no, so that can be sustainable, it can be sustained, no, and at the same time, talagang mas marami yung makinabang na mga taong bayan doon sa proyektong yun. So we'll start with 4. Actually sa OVP, 6 key advocacy areas kami. But for our NGO, we will start with 4. But of course, hindi makakalimutan dito yung pag-engage sa iba't ibang sektor, katulad ng mga kabataan, kababaihan, no, LGBTQIA, no, at napakarami pang iba.
Okay, sagutin lang natin to. Sabi ni Alice Farolan, di ba ang gobyerno ang gumagawa ng lahat na yan? Or yun ang problema kasi ang gobyerno, maraming tinututukan. Tama, trabaho to dapat ng gobyerno, pero kailangan tulungan kasi hindi kayang harapin ng gobyerno lahat yan, di ba? Yun ang purpose ng NGO. Tama ba, Rafi?
Yes, oo. Again, yung NGO, hindi siya kalaban ng pamahalaan. Yung ginagawa ng NGO ay nag-fill siya ng gaps, no? Actually sa entire process, sa developmental process, 'di ba? Ng pagre-respond ng NGO at ng government. Most of the time nakuha na yung NGO kasi very flexible siya. But ang mag-sustain talaga, ang papalalim, and at the same time, no, yung talagang magpapatuloy ng programang ito, dapat yung local government units or yung national government agencies natin. But again, uulitin natin yan na hindi kalaban ang mga non-government organizations ng pamahalaan. Partners kami, no? Katulong kami, katuwang kami ng pamahalaan para maisakatuparan ang goals nila, no, para sa ating mga kababayan.
So malinaw yan, this is not intended to upstage President Bongbong Marcos. Kasi yun ang sinasabi ng ibang mga loyalista niya.
Hindi
Rafi.
naman po.
Okay, ito. May tanong si Anchita Loa. How can I volunteer as a tutor or teacher in an LGU? Gusto niya mag-volunteer.
Medyo marami-rami yung ganong klaseng question. So si Attorney Lenny announced yung ating email where we can respond doon sa mga ganitong klaseng queries. So if you have questions po on how to volunteer, how to partner with us, you can email us at info@angatbuhay.ph. So again, that's info@angatbuhay.ph, no? So that we can respond to your queries. Kasi pag mga ganitong question, kailangan ng iba pang detalye like saan kang LGU, anong grade level po ng ang gusto mong turuan, ano po yung subject matter expertise ninyo, etc. So I guess we have to get more details so that we can respond to you po properly.
Teka, nilista ko. Tama ba to? Baka magpakalat ako ng fake news info@angatbuhay.ph.
Yes po.
Pag may mga tanong daw kayo how to volunteer, info@angatbuhay.ph. Wala ba kayong parang Google Sheet or sign up form? May ganun ba kayo?
Wala tayong Google Sheet and sign up form. Nag-try kami dati kaso trinol. So, email
At tinroll?
na lang.
Bakit? Ano nangyari? Marami nag-sign up na kalokohan?
Oo.
Alam nyo, ang sama ng ugali nyo talaga mga trolls kayo, no? Yung, pag maganda yung programa, wag nyo ito troll, ha? Kasi nakikinahabang dito yung mga Pilipino, okay? Eto, may tanong si May Padawan. Ito, napakaganda ng tanong na to. May project daw po ba kayo para makatulong sa mga anak or kapatid ng OFW? Alam ko, isa to sa mga priorities ng di ba? Na nabanggit nyo during the campaign. Ano ba, may programa ba kayo para sa kanila?
Yes, I think wala pa ako sa liberty to announce the good news, some of the good news that we got earlier mula sa iba't ibang mga pledges ng ating mga partners. But soon, no, sana ibabahagi namin, no, yung iba't ibang mga programa, lalong-lalo na tungkol sa edukasyon, support sa ating mga kababayan, no, na nangangailangan talaga ng support sa edukasyon, sa healthcare at iba pa, no. So give us some time lang po to really process all the pledges from our partners, and we'll make sure to update you, no, through our social media channels po.
Okay, ito may tanong. May app daw kayo, di ba? Tama ba?
Yes.
So, ano yung function
Oo,
yan? Tapos, related na rin, ang tanong naman dito, how can you fund such projects? Where will these fundings come from?
So, yung app na i-launch din natin, na-launch na siya. So, I don't know if you've heard of Lenny app. Noong kampanya, ginagamit siya to basically update what's happening sa campaign trail, etc. So, we're transforming that to Angat Buhay app. It's a resource mobilization platform, but it's also an app where you can access, no, factual news, no, stories, no, about Angat Buhay. Ano yun, kung anong mga communities at mga sektor yung tinutulungan natin. So through the app, you can donate, no, an amount, no, specified doon sa application na yon, that will go to a specific project, no, sa Angat Buhay. I think there will be three parang there will be three segments, no, doon sa ating doon sa doon sa Angat Buhay app, no. First is yung patron, where you can donate any amount, no, monthly, quarterly, or even yearly, annually, no. Number two is yung disaster readiness fund. We would like to make sure that we have enough resources, no, to respond to the needs of our kababayan, lalong-lalo na kapag may bagyo, may sakuna, etc. At pangatlo, yung project specific na funding. So basically, parang it's like a crowdfunding mechanism, no, through the app. And when you donate through the app, you'll get, no, definitely an acknowledgement and an update, no, kung saan ginamit yung donasyon na binigay ninyo. We'll keep you posted kung kailan ito magiging ready. Of course, we want to make sure that we follow all the rules and regulations, no, so we will make sure to get all the necessary permits and approval, no, before we officially launch the app. Kung saan galing po yung funding, para po sa kaalaman ng lahat, pag non-government organization po, usually, no, through donations, we also write grant proposals, no, to different funding agencies, no, so that we can implement projects sa iba't ibang lugar sa Pilipinas.
Tapos ito, sana pwede raw abroad yung app. This can be accessed, di ba, by people?
Yes, but I guess I'll just have to clarify, no, kasi syempre may necessary permits, no, and approvals that we need to get, lalong-lalo na if we will accept donations coming from outside of the Philippines.
Okay. Ito naman, how hands-on will the former Vice President be in these programs that you mentioned?
Very hands-on. Si Attorney Lenny will sit as our chairperson. Earlier, in our first board meeting, she was elected as a member, no, of the executive committee. So the executive committee is the oversight, no, and at the same time, part of the programming of the NGO. So we basically report to the chairperson, and yung chairperson, no, helps us, no, in designing programs, no, doon sa ating Angat Buhay NGO. Katulad ng involvement niya sa Office of the Vice President, I think it's the same. Actually, para sa akin, mas hands-on pang right now kasi hindi na siya as busy, and at the same time, hindi na mas maraming iniisip. So talagang makakatutok sa NGO si Attorney Lenny Robredo.
Okay. Tapos ito, pasagot ko rin sa ito, no? Kasi maraming sorry, medyo related sa politika to, pero it's not that difficult naman. Pero kasi may mga alam mo naman yung ingay ng politika, 'di ba, nung kampanya. Ordinarily, pag ikaw natalo ko sa isang eleksyon, unless may iba ka pang ambisyon, 'di ba? Parang pwede ka nang tumahimik, 'di ba? Para magpahinga na. Bakit ito? The day after she stepped down, bigla siyang nag-launch nitong Angat Buhay. Kumbaga, bakit pa? Kasi ordinarily, isipin ng iba, pag trapo, 'di ba? Ano, bahala na kayo sa buhay nyo. Ayaw nyo akong presidente, 'di ba? So, doon kayo humingi ng tulong doon sa nanalo. Pero dito, bakit she decided to keep going and actually turn this into an NGO, tapos ang aspirations niya maging nationwide pa, di ba? Bakit ganon?
Even before pa siyang mag-decide to run, pinag-uusapan na din talaga namin yung next steps for Angat Buhay after kaming umalis sa Office of the Vice President. No? So, hindi siya dahil lang natalo siya sa eleksyon, naghanap siya ng something na pagkakabisihan niya. So, hindi yun ganun. So, matagal nang pinag-uusapan kung paano isusustain yung mga nasimulan natin sa Angat Buhay sa Office of the Vice President. No? And pangalawa, I think ito yung commitment ni Attorney Leni Robredo doon sa mga pinangako niya noong kampanya. Yung pinangako naman kasi niya sa kampanya, pwede naman yun gawin even outside the government. No? And I think hindi naman siya yung klase ng leader at ng tao na dahil lamang hindi siya nahalal sa isang posisyon, hindi na siya maghahanap ng paraan para makatulong. Actually, aside from being the chairperson of the NGO, siya rin ay babalik no sa mga dati niyang mga organisasyon katulad ng Saligan no para naman i-pursue yung kanilang legal education advocacy no. So sa tingin ko ano ba tawag mo dito, ganun lang talaga siyang klaseng leader. Siguro mahirap makahanap ng ganun. Kami actually noong alam na namin yung resulta, nag-iisip na kami kung anong mga pwedeng gawin. But I think si Attorney Leni Robredo talagang grounded us so that we can we'll remember no yung mga ipinangako namin noong kampanya.
So, in short, hindi mo kailangan ng posisyon, hindi mo kailangang mapunta sa pamahalaan para gawin yung mga ipinangako during the campaign.
Hindi for Attorney Leni.
Yeah, oo. So, ito, bago tayo magtapos, no, alam ko may isa pang initiative, no? If you can say something about that, yung isa rin sa mga priorities niya. Kasi sabi mo, babalik siya rin sa dati niyang trabaho bilang human rights lawyer, no? Yung nagtatanggol, yung parang providing free, libre po yun, no? Legal assistance doon sa mga maliliit, no? How about yung kampanya against disinformation? 'Di ba? Kailan to ilo-launch naman? Do you have any information on that?
Yung sa campaign on disinformation and misinformation, I guess, talagang lifelong na magiging struggle natin na not only ni Attorney Leni Robredo, pero pati na rin ng iba't ibang mga nasa civic organizations. No? Yung exact details on that, I think I'll leave it to Attorney Leni no, to share sa atin. Yung Angat Buhay NGO is really focused no, on development projects and programs that we can implement in different communities in the Philippines, no. But again, yung fight natin against disinformation and misinformation, patuloy siyang magiging priority for Attorney Leni.
Okay. Rafi Magno, siya po ang Executive Director ng Angat Buhay Program. Maraming salamat sa iyo, Rafi. Alam kong busy kayo at salamat at pinagbigyan nyo kami dito sa Panayam ngayong gabi. Salamat and good luck.
Salamat, Christian. Maraming salamat po.
Okay. Maraming salamat kay Rafi. Okay. So, yan po. Tatlo yung topics sa pinag-usapan natin ngayon. No? Dito sa huli, sana, minsan kasi nakakadismaya yung yung porke divided tayo ng ng mga political beliefs nating mga Pilipino. Yung para bang, pag may nakita kang programa maganda, lalagyan mo agad ng kulay, di ba? Suriin nyo, kung maganda yung programa, edi suportahan nyo. Or at the very least, shut up na lang kayo. Ganun din naman, di ba? Kunwari dito, sa bagong administrasyon ni President Bongbong Marcos, kung maganda yung programa, pupurihin yan. Dapat purihin, di ba? Kaya binabanggit ko isang maganda sinabi during the inaugural speech, no? Yung parang hindi siya magre-resort to credit grabbing. That is a very good, that is a very good statement. Kasi, tulad na nabanggit ko kanina, ang problema natin dito sa Pilipinas, Kada administrasyon every 6 years nagpapalit, no? Nandun laging credit grabbing. Miski alam mo hindi naman sila nagsimula, di ba? Tapos parang allergic sila sa idea ng pagbanggit noong gains na nangyari during the previous administration. So yan, isa yan sa mga dapat ayusin natin. And of course, dun nga, again, talking about the inaugural speech, maganda yung mga sinabi doon ni President Marcos. At sana magkatotoo. Kasi napaka-aspirational ng mga sinabi niya, di ba? Sino ba who could argue? Who would argue against a leader who would want to bring the country to the next level, to inspire more Filipinos to act with the government? Ang tanong dyan, ano ba yung detalye nun? Di ba? Kasi baka naman in the end, nagkakabulahan tayo dito, di ba? Ito, isa ko example kanina. Hindi ko masyadong natutukan tong issue nito dun sa conversation namin ni Professor Franco, di ba? Sinasabi, ang message of unity napakalinaw, indeed resounding. At maraming Pilipino ang sumuporta ron. 31 million Filipinos. They heeded the call of unity. Maganda yon, di ba? Pero ano po ba yung magiging mukha ng unity na to? Ito ba unity na talagang bawal ka na magsalita pag meron ka nakitang hindi maganda? Although again, sinabi ni President Bongbong Marcos kahapon sa kanyang speech, makikinig daw sila respectfully sa contra-reviews. Kaya it's no joke. Kung kayo mga trolls, mag-isip-isip kayo. Kasi sinasabi ng presidente, dapat makinig sa contra-reviews. Open sa mga suggestions coming from hard thinking and unsparing judgment. Okay? Napaka-importante po nun. And number 2 point na gusto ko itanong, iiwanan ko to sa inyo ngayong gabi, since this is the end of the week. Posible po pa ang unity sa isang bansa kung saan laganap ang trolling. Kasi kung gano'n mukhang nagbubulahan tayo, di ba? So, kung talagang gusto natin ng unity, dapat sabihin natin itong mga trolls na to, stand down. Okay? Give democracy a chance. Kasi talagang sinisira ng trolling, ng pagpapakalat ng disinformasyon, itong klase ng demokrasya na meron tayo. Okay? Lalong nasisira po yung demokrasya natin dahil dito sa mga trolls na ito. Huwag niyo pong gawin, kayong mga trolls, kayong nagpapakalat ng disinformasyon, and I hope hindi kayo gumagamit ng government resources doon sa ginagawa niyong kawalanghiyaan. Huwag niyo po sanang gawing bisyo yung mamperwisyo. Yun lang po yung iiwanan ko sa inyo ngayong gabi. Okay? Maraming salamat po for joining us tonight, and see you again on Monday for another episode of Facts First. Thank you po and good night.